You're listening to Tea with Tolkien, a podcast for the Hobbit at heart. Join us as we chat about the works and faith of J.R.R. Tolkien and strive to carry a little piece of Middle-earth into our own daily lives. This is the second in a 7-part book club series on the Lord of the Rings that we are doing. If you would like to join our free book club, you can visit teawithtolkien.com/book-club. And if you would like to support us on Patreon and become a member of our Patreon community, you can go to patreon.com/teawithtolkien for all of the information. We are on Book 2, which is the second half of the Fellowship of the Ring. Chapter 1. Many Meetings. Frodo awakens to find himself in the home of Elrond, where he is overjoyed to see Gandalf sitting before him. As they talk, Gandalf recounts what happened at the ford and on their journeys beforehand. He assures Frodo that he is safe for now, dwelling in the last homely house east of the sea. Tolkien writes, Frodo was now safe in the last homely house east of the sea. That house was perfect, as Bilbo had long ago reported. A perfect house, whether you liked food or sleep or storytelling or singing or just sitting and thinking best, or a pleasant mixture of them all. Merely to be there was a cure for weariness, fear, and sadness. I love that quote so much. I actually have it hanging above my fireplace because it is my dream and my hope for my home. So as Frodo awakens to find himself in the home of Elrond, he is just washed over with this comfort and peace. Just as Bilbo had described it in The Hobbit, it was perfect. But the beauty of Elrond's home doesn't come from the decorations or the magnificence or the presentation of it all, but from the spirit of the home itself. Within its halls, Frodo finds a hospitality that is both life-saving and life-giving. This points back to the way that I have always felt that hospitality is a state of mind and a heart, not necessarily dependent on a person's home or resources. A weary soul can find comfort in a hobbit's quaint little garden just as easily as it can in a grand kingdom hall, because the root of hospitality is love. After a quiet rest, Sam comes to Frodo and he brings him in to see the others. Together they all come into the hall of Elrond's house, where there is a great feast that has been prepared, and they meet a lot of unfamiliar faces. Frodo is seated beside Glóin, one of the dwarves which accompanied Bilbo on his great adventure. As the feast comes to a close, the guests follow Elrond and Arwen into the Hall of Fire, where they gather to talk. In the hall, Frodo is surprised and overjoyed to see Bilbo resting beside the fire. Bilbo tells Frodo that he should not travel again, but instead intends to spend the rest of his days in Rivendell. Bilbo later asks to see the ring, and when Frodo draws it out, a shadow comes between them, and Bilbo seems to appear as a little wrinkled creature with a hungry face and bony, groping hands. This obviously horrifies Frodo, so he puts the ring away. Strider joins them after a little while, and then Frodo sinks into a deep sleep. As he dreams, he hears Bilbo singing a great long song, and he awakens to find that he had been singing for everyone. Afterwards, Frodo and Bilbo sit talking about their adventures late into the night, so it's just a lovely reunion. This is a nice, happy, little, relaxing, calming chapter. Which leads us to Chapter 2, the Council of Elrond. And if this is your first time reading The Lord of the Rings after having read the Silmarillion, I feel like this is going to be pretty exciting. In the morning, Frodo is met by Gandalf and Bilbo, who walk alongside him to the Council of Elrond. There, Elrond draws Frodo a seat beside him and introduces him to the others present, saying, "Here, my friends, is the hobbit, Frodo, son of Drogo. Few have ever come hither through greater peril or on an errand more urgent." Elrond introduces Frodo to Gimli, Galdor, Legolas, and Boromir, who are also there. Speaking first, Glóin tells of a disquiet that had fallen upon the dwarves. Rumors have grown of a nameless fear that dwells in Moria. He explains that about a year ago, a messenger came from Mordor, claiming Sauron the Great wished for friendship and information about hobbits, because they knew that they had dealt with hobbits in the past. The messenger asks the dwarves to find this hobbit that they had once known, and retrieve from him a ring that had been stolen. This ring is not very important, they say. However, Sauron just, wants it for no reason. The dwarves have left this request unanswered because it greatly troubled their hearts, and this is what has prompted Glóin and Gimli to seek the wisdom of Rivendell. Elrond revealed that they have all been called together to determine what to do with this ring, this trifle that Sauron fancies. He recounts the history of the ring from its very beginning. He tells of Sauron, the creator of the ring, the last alliance of the elves and men as they stood against Mordor, Isildur's victory against Sauron and his claiming of the ring, and of Isildur's death. Elrond explains that Mordor is weakened but not defeated, and Sauron is growing in power now. At this, Boromir stands up and begins to speak about the struggles of Gondor against the forces of Mordor. He then tells the members of the council that he has come to Rivendell seeking wisdom, not allies in war, because of a troubling dream that both he and his brother have had. In it, he says, the eastern sky grew dark, but in the west a pale light lingered, and from it he heard a voice speaking of a sword that was broken, of Isildur's bane, and of a halfling. Aragorn then stands up, showing Boromir the sword that was broken, and at this, Elrond reveals that Aragorn, Strider, is the heir of Isildur, which is a huge shocker. Crazy. Gandalf solemnly asks Frodo to bring out the ring, which Elrond calls Isildur's bane. Boromir is awestruck and gazes at the ring, filled with doubt about what he's heard. At this, then, Bilbo recites the poem that he had written about Aragorn. All that is gold does not glitter, not all those who wander are lost, etc., etc., that we read last book. Afterwards, Bilbo tells the story of how he found the ring and how it passed to Frodo. Then Frodo tells the part he has played so far in the Tale of the Ring. After this, Galdor then is like, hey, why isn't Saruman here if everyone else is here? So Gandalf has to get up and he tells this whole story of Saruman's betrayal, explaining that Saruman had counseled him against seeking out the ring, lulling him into a kind of sense of peace with his perceived wisdom. Gandalf says that he desired to know about how the ring came from Gollum, so he had asked Aragorn and the other rangers to search for him. After this, Gandalf went to Gondor to read the records of ancient days, where he found the writings of Isildur, which described the ring. And this is how he was able to understand that Frodo's ring was the One Ring. Then Aragorn tells about how he captured and brought Gollum to Mirkwood, where Gandalf met them and spent a bunch of time speaking with Gollum. He learned that the ring had allowed him to live for many lifetimes, a power only the great rings held. He also learned from Gollum that the enemy knows that the ring had been found, that it was in the Shire, and that they will soon know it is in Rivendell. At this point, Aragorn is like, thank goodness though, because we have Gollum in Mirkwood and he is safely held in captivity by the elves and we don't have to worry about him. However, in this moment, Legolas is like, oh no, guys, I have bad news. I'm so sorry to say this, but Gollum has actually escaped from Mirkwood. Gandalf then returns to the question of Saruman. He explains that he was traveling near Bree and he was met by Radagast the Brown, who is another wizard, who brought him news from Saruman that the Nazgul are abroad and asking for news of the Shire, and that he needed to go see Saruman right away. So Gandalf heads there quickly. However, when he arrives, he found Saruman changed. Saruman the White is now calling himself Saruman Ringmaker, Saruman of many colors. Saruman then tells Gandalf that the time of the elves is over and the time when they must rule over men is at hand. A new power is rising, he says, that they must join with. Gandalf explains that Saruman believes he can take the ring for himself and wield its power, which Gandalf acknowledges is folly. There's this quote from Gandalf recounting what Saruman said that just absolutely gave me chills, and I wanted to read it. This then is one choice before you, before us. We may join with that power. It would be wise, Gandalf. There is hope that way. Its victory is at hand, and there will be rich reward for those that aided it. As the power grows, its proved friends will also grow. And the wise, such as you and I, may with patience come at last to direct its course, to control it. We can bide our time. We can keep our thoughts in our hearts, deploring maybe evils done by the way, but approving the high and ultimate purpose, knowledge, rule, order, all the things that we have so far striven in vain to accomplish, hindered rather than helped by our weak or idle friends. There need not be, there would not be, any real change in our designs, only in our means. This quote just immediately when I read it, it made me think of like a corrupt politician or a corrupt priest or bishop. And it just like gave me chills because it's so sneaky the way that they are like, The way that Saruman is like, we don't need to change anything that we're doing. We kind of just need to sit still and bide our time. We need to kind of go along with these plans, even though they might seem evil. The ends are going to be good. And this is just honestly exactly how bad things happen. However, Gandalf is not falling for it. Refusing to join with Saruman, Gandalf was held prisoner in the pinnacle of Orthanc. However, an eagle had been sent from Mirkwood to bring news to Gandalf, and so he was found and carried away from Orthanc by Gwaihir the Wind Lord. He carried Gandalf to Rohan, where he was able to take a horse, and he rode the horse to Hobbiton to find that Frodo had already left. And then after being unable to find Frodo, Gandalf eventually came to Rivendell, and he arrived only 3 days before Frodo. So Tom Bombadil comes up in the Council of Elrond, and they are suggesting, hey, what if we take the ring to Tom Bombadil? Because he doesn't seem to be affected at all. However, they come to the conclusion that he would not be a good caretaker of the ring because he would probably just throw it away. He would probably just forget about it. He doesn't really care. Others suggest casting the ring into the sea to be lost, but Gandalf urges them to seek an end to the ring forever. At last, the council comes to understand that none of them have the power to wield the ring, neither can they destroy it by any weapon that they possess. It can only be destroyed in the fires of Mount Doom where it was made, and so it must be taken there to be unmade. Despite all of this, Boromir still wishes to use the ring against the enemy, but Elrond reminds him over and over that only Sauron can truly wield it, and that the ring is altogether evil. Now, while Sauron is wise, he has assumed that anyone who held the ring would seek to use it, just like Boromir wants to, and Gandalf explains, into his heart the thought will not enter that any will refuse it, that having the ring we may seek to destroy it. If we seek this, we shall put him out of reckoning. At this, then, sweet little Bilbo gets up and he's like, okay, I'll do it. Bilbo assumes that, all right, since he carried the ring before, it's going to be his responsibility to take the ring to Mordor. But Gandalf tells him, no, dear, you won't need to carry it any longer. Bilbo is obviously too old and frail for this task. And everyone treats Bilbo with a lot of respect when he does offer, but they're like, it's not your burden to carry anymore. With a great effort, eventually Frodo stands to speak and he says, I will take the ring to Mordor, though I do not know the way. Elrond agrees that Frodo should be the one to carry it, although he says that he will not have to go alone. Tolkien writes, the road must be trod, but it will be very hard, and neither strength nor wisdom will carry us far upon it. This quest may be attempted by the weak with as much hope as the strong, yet such is oft the course of deeds that move the wheels of the world. Small hands do them because they must, while the eyes of the great are elsewhere. So in the Council of Elrond, the fate of the ring is at last decided. All the free peoples of Middle-earth must come together to carry out this quest, but it is on the least of them that the greatest burden falls. As Frodo accepts the task of carrying the ring, Elrond responds, this is the hour of the Shire folk, when they arise from their quiet fields to shake the towers and councils of the great. But he doesn't have to go alone. Although the ring is his to carry, the peril of his quest belongs to all the peoples of Middle-earth. In this decision, there is a special emphasis placed on the hidden power of the small and weak. Even in their decision to destroy the ring, rather than to seek to wield it, the members of the Council of Elrond have already humbled themselves, rather than grasping for power. And in his arrogance, Sauron has not even begun to suspect that they would seek to destroy it, or that it would be carried by someone so unimportant and small as a hobbit. And this is their advantage. Chapter 3. The Ring Goes South. After the Great Council, Elrond sends scouts to survey the lands before the company will depart. Frodo and his companions spend about 2 months growing in renewed strength as they await the beginning of their journey. When the scouts return, they report that no signs of the Black Rider or Gollum have been seen. And at last, Elrond chooses to send 9 companions to match the 9 riders, which he calls the Fellowship of the Ring. Now, fun fact about this is they depart on December 25th, which is Christmas Day. So the members of the Fellowship are all chosen to represent the peoples of Middle-earth. We've got Frodo, Sam, Gandalf, Legolas, Gimli, Aragorn, Boromir, Pippin, and Merry. Elrond originally wanted to send Merry and Pippin back to the Shire, but Gandalf, to everyone's surprise, sided with the hobbits and suggested that they should be included in the Fellowship. Tolkien writes, I think, Elrond, that in this matter it would be well to trust to their friendship rather than to great wisdom. And so this is how we get the other two hobbits on the Fellowship, which is awesome. We will see as we keep reading how important it is that they are there. On their last morning in Rivendell, Bilbo gives Frodo his sword, Sting, as well as his mithril coat. And as they depart, Elrond reminds each of the companions that only Frodo is bound to the ring, and the others have taken no oath or pledge to go further than they will. Gimli and Elrond have a little passive-aggressive argument about whether the members of the Fellowship should be taking oaths. Gimli says, "Faithless is he that says farewell when the road darkens." And Elrond replies, "Let him not vow to walk in the dark who has not seen the nightfall." As they leave, then, Elrond offers them a little parting blessing. He says, "Farewell, and may the blessing of elves and men and all the free folk go with you. May the stars shine upon your faces." They then journey through bitter cold and wind, traveling alongside the mountains until they come to the borders of Hollin. From there, they plan to journey towards the pass called the Redhorn Gate, under the far side of Caratharos. Gandalf and Aragorn seem to be in a debate about their path concerning Minas Tirith and the Gap of Rohan, but they decide to face the weather in the high pass of the mountains. After struggling through deep snow, they are at last defeated by the mountains, however, and they agree to turn around. So then Boromir and Aragorn go ahead to make a path through the snow because it is incredibly snowy. And in this part is so funny because Legolas just jumps up and speeds through the snow while all of the others are struggling. And it just kind of is an example of the difference between elves and everyone else. After they have all come back down from the mountain, the path behind them is then covered in fallen stones and snow. And so the mountain option is no longer an option. Chapter 4. A Journey in the Dark. Defeated by the mountain, Gandalf suggests that the Fellowship should journey through the mines of Moria. They soon realize at this point that they are being pursued by wolves, so they hurry towards the entrance of Moria, despite everyone but Gimli dreading the idea of it. As the Fellowship comes to the west door of Moria, Gandalf explains that they stand at the passageway which was made chiefly for the elves in their business with the dwarves of Moria. Tolkien writes, "Those were happier days, when there was still close friendship at times between the folk of different race, even the dwarves and elves. The dwarvish doors are marked with the phrase, 'Speak, friend, and enter,' and open only when the elvish word for friend is spoken." After quite some time, Gandalf is able to figure this out. As they step across the threshold, something seizes Frodo by the ankle, dragging him towards the water. Sam slashes at it, and it releases Frodo, and together they all run through the open doors. The creature follows them, slamming the doors closed and essentially trapping the Fellowship inside. So at this point, they have no choice but to go forward through this deadly dark. Gandalf leads them, guessing that their journey will be about 40 miles to the East Gate, if they don't get lost. For the most part, they walk in deep silence, but Frodo keeps hearing, or thinking he hears, the faint fall of soft bare feet behind them. Gandalf then comes to this dark arch opening into 3 passages, of which he has no memory at all. As Gandalf tries to decide which path to take, they come to this great big room with a large hole in the ground. Pippin, overwhelmed with curiosity, drops a stone into it, and Gandalf is pretty angry. After that, Gandalf figures out which passage to go through, and then they soon come to a great hall where they rest for a while. Guessing they are only about a day away from the great gates, they continue forward and come to the tomb of Balin. Chapter 5. The Bridge of Khazad-dûm. The company stands beside Balin's tomb, realizing his people had been trapped in this room and had died in a last stand. At this, Gandalf urges them to get out quickly. But before they are able to flee, they hear a terrible boom echoing throughout Moria and soon find themselves in the midst of a great battle. They fight off a cave troll and many orcs until the rest retreat, and then Gandalf urges them to run. Frodo is hit by an orc spear, but to the great relief of his friends, he is not badly wounded. They rush out of the chamber and fly downwards as quickly as they can, stumbling through the dark. Gandalf is weary, having faced something that he has not met before, remarking, "There is some new devilry here." They continue to flee towards the Bridge of Khazad-dûm, and at last, Legolas understands that they are being pursued by a Balrog. Ooh. Gandalf urges the company to run as he stands to face the Balrog, and all but Aragorn and Boromir race along the bridge. Tolkien writes, "You cannot pass," he said. The orcs stood still, and a dead silence fell. "I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Anor. You cannot pass. The dark fire will not avail you, flame of Udon. Go back to the shadow. You cannot pass." Gandalf uses his staff to crack the bridge beneath the Balrog. It falls, but the Balrog's whip wraps around Gandalf's knees and drags him to the edge. "Fly, you fools," he cries and falls. Aragorn then takes upon himself the leadership of the remainder of the Fellowship, and they run towards the light before them. They pass out of the gates and down the threshold of Moria, where they are met by the shining sun. Now, in this chapter, Gandalf's courageous leadership is really on full display here. Throughout the darkness of Moria, he has been guiding them by the light of his staff, carefully discerning their course. Even as they find time to rest, he takes the longest watches to allow the others to sleep. And as he faces the Balrog, Gandalf spends himself entirely, sacrificing his own life for the sake of the Fellowship. He binds his fate to that of the Balrog because he knows that if he is unable to defeat it or to keep it away from Frodo, their quest will be lost. Despite being arguably the most important person within the Fellowship, because he's a wizard, guys, he's a wizard, he humbles himself to the role of servant, withholding nothing of himself and surrendering his own life for the sake of those he leads. His sacrifice on behalf of his friends and their quest reminds me of John 15:13. Greater love has none than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. Chapter 6. Lothlorian. Though overcome with grief, Aragorn urges the company to continue on away from the gates towards Lothlorien. Soon they come to the outer borders of Lothlorien, and they find a little place to rest. They then wade across the waters of the Nimrodel, and are soon met by elves who wish to speak with Frodo. They drop a ladder down from the trees, and Legolas leads Frodo and Sam up to meet them. They come to a wooden platform called a flet, where the elves speak with Frodo about the course of the Fellowship. That night, Frodo awakens in the dark to the sound of clashing metal, and he realizes that orcs have been near. He also notices something slowly climbing up the tree with two pale eyes, but it suddenly stops, turns away, and vanishes. In the morning, the company follows Haldir through the trees and across the river Celebrant. After they cross, the elves insist on blindfolding Gimli, and when he protests, however, Aragorn suggests that they all be blindfolded together. The company slowly follows Haldir throughout the woods, and after a while they are met by some other elves who bring word that Gimli and all of the company are able to walk freely, and so their blindfolds are then removed. After this, they continue on to Cairn Amroth, the heart of Lothlorien. It's in this chapter that we read one of my absolute favorite Tolkien quotes spoken by Haldir. Tolkien writes, "The world is indeed full of peril, and in it there are many dark places. But still there is much that is fair. And though in all lands love is now mingled with grief, it grows perhaps the greater." The longer we walk the roads of Tolkien's world and our own, the more we begin to understand the mingling of love and grief to which Haldir refers. This juxtaposition is seen most clearly within the lives and wisdom of Tolkien's elves. They are both young and old, gay and sad, perilous and fair. They have lived through the victories and the defeats of the history of Middle-earth, experiencing great moments of joy as well as years and years of deepening sorrow. Yet through all of it, they continue to insist that love grows all the greater. Chapter 7. The Mirror of Galadriel. The company continues on, where they are summoned to speak with Celeborn and Galadriel. They climb up many flets until they have come to a wide landing, where Celeborn and Galadriel sit. The elves cry out in grief as the remaining members of the Fellowship tell them about what happened to Gandalf and his fall into shadow. Galadriel offers them shelter and aid and says that their quest is known to her. After many days in Lothlorien, Galadriel comes to Frodo and Sam and brings them to the Mirror of Galadriel. Sam looks into it first, hoping for a glimpse of the Shire, but in the mirror he sees many things. He sees Frodo lying with a pale face under a dark cliff, himself going along a dim passage, climbing an endless stair, Ted Sandyman cutting down trees, and the old mill gone. He cries, turning away from the mirror, and he just wishes desperately to go home. And yet, after this, he resolves even more firmly to stay true to his quest and his commitment to Frodo. Frodo looks into the mirror next, and he sees a long, gray, winding road, a figure resembling Gandalf or Saruman clothed in white, Bilbo walking restlessly in his room, Many scenes of the history of the Middle-earth, the sea in a great storm, a banner with a white tree on it, then smoke from fire and battle. Then suddenly he stands staring into the black abyss as a single eye, wreathed in fire, grows larger. Frodo senses that the eye is searching for him, and he feels the mirror pulling Frodo towards it. Galadriel calls for him not to touch the water, and the vision fades. After this, Frodo is pretty freaked out, and he offers to give the ring to Galadriel. She is a little bit tempted, admitting that she has long desired it, wishing to rule as a queen, not dark but beautiful, as terrible as the dawn. No, okay. But she resists and then says, I pass the test. I will diminish and go into the west and remain Galadriel. Throughout this chapter, a theme of temptation grows as the Fellowship dwells in Lothlorien. Tolkien writes, all of them, it seemed, had fared alike. Each had felt that he was offered a choice between a shadow full of fear that lay ahead and something that he greatly desired. Clear before his mind it lay, and to get to it he only had to turn aside from the road and leave the quest and the war against Sauron to others. While they experience a great sense of healing under the care of the elves, each member of the Fellowship also faces this temptation to abandon their quest. And as Galadriel brings them to look into the mirror, Frodo and Sam struggle most with the desire to return home to the Shire. Frodo wavers even to the point of offering the ring to Galadriel. In their temptation, they seem to be assured that if they turn aside from this task, others will take it up and carry it. They sense that the road before them lies in shadow, and yet their greatest desires appear clearly in their minds. In this, they want to cling to the familiar and fear the unknown peril of their quest. And I feel like this is so relatable in a way because the unknown is always scarier than the known. To step forward without knowing what we'll find is uncomfortable, and it requires courage and trust, and it's easy to feel like we can't handle the stress of it. One of the most exciting things about this chapter is that we are finally meeting Galadriel for the first time in The Lord of the Rings, and she's such an incredible character. Since our book club read The Silmarillion earlier this year, we can look at her character in light of everything we've learned about her. Let's recap. Galadriel was born in Valinor, the Blessed Realm, the daughter of Finarfin and niece of Feanor. She was renowned for her strength and beauty. Tolkien writes in The Silmarillion, she was most beautiful of all the house of Finwë. Her hair was lit with gold as if it had caught in a mesh the radiance of Laurelin. If we'll remember our Silmarillion lore, Laurelin was the golden tree of Valinor. From the fruit of this tree, the sun was made. So Galadriel is indeed older than the sun itself. Just let that sink in for a second. So cool. In the time of The Lord of the Rings, she is dwelling in Lothlorien with her husband, Celeborn. Her daughter, Celebrian, was the wife of Elrond and mother of Arwen. So Galadriel is Arwen's grandmother, which is crazy. Crazy. In letter 142, Tolkien responds to a letter from Father Robert Murray, his friend, who had compared the image of Galadriel to that of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Tolkien writes in his reply, I think I know exactly what you mean by the order of grace, and of course by your reference to Our Lady, upon which all my own small perception of beauty, both in majesty and simplicity, is founded. Chapter 8. Farewell to Lorien. After a time, the company is summoned to the chamber of Celeborn, where they speak of their plans for departure. The members of the Fellowship are offered the choice to continue their quest or to end their part in it, but they all choose to continue forward. They realize they must choose soon whether to take the western shore to Minas Tirith or the eastern shore towards the land of Mordor. Celeborn supplies the Fellowship with boats, enabling them to travel by the river as they discern their course. So by doing this, they're able to put off the decision for just a little bit longer. That evening, they debate their path late into the night. Boromir seems to be thinking aloud, saying he will go to Minas Tirith alone if he needs to, and muttering that it would be folly to throw away. Frodo wonders uneasily if Boromir were referring to the ring, and I think it's pretty obvious that he was. So Boromir is really struggling with the idea of throwing away the ring and destroying it because he still sees it as this really important weapon that he thinks he'll be able to wield against the enemy. Now in the morning, the elves bring gifts of food and clothing to the company. They then come to the banks of the Silverlode, where 3 small gray boats have been prepared for them. Galadriel comes to bid them farewell, and together they enjoy a parting feast in the grass. Before they leave, they all drink from the cup of parting, and they are each given a gift from Galadriel. They then slowly paddle away into the currents of the great river, where their boats begin to move quickly southward. Let's look at the gifts of Galadriel. To all of the fellowship, she gave lembas, elvish cloaks, and rope. To Aragorn, a sheath made to fit his sword, a green stone set in an elvish brooch, and the name Elessar, the elf stone of the house of Elendil. To Boromir she gave a belt of gold. To Legolas, a bow of the Galathrim and a quiver of arrows. To Samwise, a small box which holds earth from her orchard to be used when he returns to his gardens. To Gimli, 3 strands of her hair, which he vows to set in crystal as a pledge of goodwill between the mountain and the wood until the end of days. To Frodo, a small crystal phial which holds the light of Yarendil's star. She says, "May it be a light to you in dark places when all other lights go out." To Merry and Pippin, she gives small silver belts with clasps like golden flowers. Now these gifts of Lothlorien strengthen the members of the Fellowship in body and soul, equipping them for the darkness of their journey ahead. One thing I wanted to point out is that while Gimli's gift from a Galadriel may seem weird at first, it actually holds great significance. In Unfinished Tales, Galadriel's hair is described as a beauty unmatched, holding the light of the 2 trees of Valinor within it. Feanor marveled at her beauty and coveted her hair, which is extremely creepy and even creepier when you realize that he's her uncle. He begged Galadriel for just 1 strand of her hair 3 times, but she refused him each time. So for Galadriel to accept Gimli's request, giving him 3 strands of her hair, causes the other elves around her to murmur, and they're like, oh my gosh, what's happening? Her gift to him represents this rekindling of friendship between dwarves and elves, the beginning of the end of hostility between these 2 races that has been going on for so long at this point. It's in a response to Gimli's humility and genuine love for Galadriel, and this is a vulnerable gift of self from Galadriel to Gimli. So it seems weird at first glance, like why would she give him strands of her hair? But like when you think about it and you understand its significance, it's really cool. Chapter 9, The Great River. The company continues southwards down the river. Boromir is having a rough time, and he's becoming increasingly restless, filled with an apparent unease and doubt. Sam reports to Frodo that a, quote, log with eyes has been following them. Frodo suspects that the eyes belong to Gollum, and eventually Aragorn confirms this. So it's been Gollum following them the whole time. By the 8th night of their journey, they come near to Sarn Gebir, where the Anduin has grown into dangerous rapids. So they slowly paddle back against the current towards the western shore, and at this point they are also starting to feel orc arrows whistling over them. They also see a great black winged creature flying above them, and Legolas uses the bow given by Galadriel to strike it down. Afterwards, they bring their boats back upstream until they're able to find a small, shallow bay in which to spend the rest of the night. Aragorn decides that they will go to Amon Hen, and there, at last, they will decide whether or not to go to Minas Tirith or to go towards Mordor. Although Boromir protests, he at last agrees to travel with them to this point, and then he's going to return to Minas Tirith. They continue on towards the Argonath, the Pillars of the King, and as they pass beneath them, Frodo looks upon Strider, and he sees him in a new light as a future king. Aragorn wishes desperately that Gandalf were still with them to counsel them because he's so conflicted. He wants to go to Minas Tirith so badly, but he can't decide the right path because it doesn't feel right to him. On their 10th day, they travel and they come to Tol Brandir, where they know that they finally have to choose whether to go east or west. Tolkien writes, "The last stage of the quest was before them." Throughout this chapter, the members of the Fellowship are growing restless and uneasy as the time to decide their course draws near. Boromir is clearly the most distressed, muttering to himself and gazing strangely at Frodo. He's continually discussing their path with Aragorn, and he seems to have made up his mind that he will go to Minas Tirith alone if he has to. Although Aragorn longs to travel to Minas Tirith, he realizes that this probably isn't going to be the right course for the ring to follow. And so he's filled with apprehension about his decision, which lies ahead. And so they continue moving towards the point where they know they're going to have to choose. Despite wishing for the counsel of Gandalf and being unsure of which path to choose, Aragorn slowly and faithfully leads the Fellowship forward. So here we see again and again, Aragorn is doing what he thinks is right. He's carefully discerning, and he's trying to lead the fellowship as best he can in the absence of Gandalf. Chapter 10, The Breaking of the Fellowship. In the morning, Aragorn calls the fellowship together to finally decide which course to take, east to Mordor or west to Minas Tirith. Aragorn places the burden of choice on Frodo, who then asks for an hour to decide. So he walks alone into the woods to think. Unbeknownst to him, Boromir is following him. Boromir finds Frodo and he counsels him to bring the ring to Minas Tirith, where he believes that they will be able to wield it against Sauron. At first, he speaks to Frodo as a friend, saying he's concerned for his safety and offering him wisdom. "Are you sure that you do not suffer needlessly?" he asks. But when Frodo resists him, Boromir becomes angry and eventually tries to take the ring from him by force. Trembling, Frodo puts on the ring and disappears from Boromir's sight. And at this, Boromir curses him. He's freaking out. But soon he's filled with great regret for betraying him. Frodo is able to resist Boromir's temptation because he knows what he has to do and he knows why. He's trusted the wisdom of Elrond, Gandalf, and Aragorn that the ring cannot be wielded and must be destroyed. And yet Boromir's arrogance has clouded his judgment, allowing him to convince himself that he would be strong enough to wield the ring. On the one hand, I have a difficult time being judgmental of Boromir because of the conditions in which he was raised. His entire life has led him up to this point and has prepared him and has led him to think that he truly could wield the ring. And from his perspective, this seems like the right choice. But as we continue reading The Lord of the Rings, we're going to learn a lot more about Boromir's father, and I think our hearts will soften even more for Boromir, and we'll understand how he could come to this decision. Like, Boromir isn't an evil guy. He's not a bad guy. However, he is a deeply flawed man, a man of pride and distrust. All of this is to say, I'm eagerly looking forward to our Discord chat's discussion of Boromir. Now, at the riverside, the remainder of the fellowship is awaiting Frodo's return. After a while, they realize Boromir isn't with them, but then he soon returns, telling them that Frodo had put on the ring and disappeared. Realizing that Frodo must have chosen his path towards the cracks of doom and suspecting he may be trying to leave on his own, Sam is freaking out and searching desperately for him. Sam sees a boat which appears to be sliding into the river by itself, and he realizes that's probably Frodo in there, so he's running towards it. However, he misses it and falls into the water. Frodo pulls Sam into the boat, and then he tries to talk Sam out of coming with him, telling him that he intends to go to Mordor alone. However, Sam refuses, and Frodo accepts him, and Frodo accepts that Sam is coming with him. Frodo is honestly relieved to have Sam at his side, and they depart without telling anyone else. They come to the southern slopes of Amon Lâ, where the hobbits hide their boats and begin on foot towards the Land of Shadow. Thus ending Book 2. So we've got a couple major themes in this book. The first being the idea that you don't have to go alone. In this book, we see the formation and the departure of the Fellowship of the Ring. Finally, their quest has fully begun. While Frodo has said that he's willing to take the burden of the ring onto himself, he acknowledges that he doesn't even know where to begin in terms of getting it to Mordor. And Elrond understands that he can't go alone. However, he doesn't send him out with a host of great warriors. Rather, he sends him in a small group meant to represent all the peoples of Middle-earth, a group formed largely around friendship. So we see the theme of fellowship carrying through from Book 1 into Book 2. There's this life-saving, life-giving friendship. We also see two really cool, really wonderful, very powerful realms of elves. We get to see Rivendell and Lothlorien. Within the bounds of these two realms, the world feels different entirely. It's been preserved and protected by the power of the elves, and it serves as a refuge for those who visit. We're also familiarized with this long-standing grudge between the elves and the dwarves, as mentioned a couple times throughout this book. But we also get to see the beginning of that healing as Gimli is just like in awe of Galadriel's beauty and the way that he so genuinely loves her, and his heart is really softened towards the elves after this. And then that kind of love is reciprocated in the way that Galadriel is willing to give Gimli 3 strands of her hair. So it's very cool because we're introduced to this feud, but we also get to see the beginning of that being mended. And we also see this in the friendship that's forming between Legolas and Gimli. We also get to see a few examples of heroic leadership, which requires sacrifice. In Gandalf's case, he was willing to give up his own life to protect the Fellowship of the Ring from the Balrog. And in Aragorn's case, we can see that he's willing to deny his own desires, both the desire to stay in Rivendell and the desire to go straight to Gondor, because he realizes that these aren't going to be what's best for the Fellowship. We also see a few times mentions of Elbarath, who is a really wonderful character that I just want to talk about for a second. Despite being referenced several times by hobbits and elves, even in these first 2 books, the character of Elbarath remains relatively unexplained throughout The Lord of the Rings. However, with the help of the Silmarillion, we can begin to understand her a little more clearly. Elbarath Gilthoniel is the Sindarin name for Varda, one of the Ainur and queens of the Valar. As the creator of the stars and most beloved by the elves, the name Elbarath is invoked in times of distress, darkness, and great need. Her beauty is beyond measure or description, and she's feared and hated most by Melkor. In Three's company, Gildor says to Frodo, "May Elbarath protect you." In A Knife in the Dark, Frodo cries out, "O Elbarath Gilthoniel," as he is stabbed by the Morgul blade. And as we journey deeper into the story of The Lord of the Rings, her name is going to be invoked many more times, so I just wanted to point that out so you guys can keep an eye out for it as we keep reading. So as we are wrapping up, I just want to remind you that if you aren't a part of our book club yet, you can join at teawithtolkien.com/book club, and with that you will get access to our Discord chat. I hope this episode was helpful and will spark some good discussion, so I look forward to seeing you all over there in the Discord. So thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, I'd love to hear from you. You can find me anywhere on social media at teawithtolkien, or you can contact me through my website at teawithtolkien.com. I will see you all later. Thanks so much.